everyone to Rules Explained. In this episode, we're going over Warhammer 40,000, Rogue Trader. I am John Merritt.
And I'm Rob Nothing.
And in this episode, we're going to be talking about vehicles. In our last episode, we talked about buildings and about how combat is done within buildings. And this one, we're going to go over vehicles. And like we said in our last episode, we both love the first sentence in vehicles. There are no specific model vehicles available for Warhammer 40K at the time of writing. Here's the game, but we don't have any vehicles yet, so go to the store and buy something else.
It's just such a contrast to today where vehicles, I think, are the bread and butter of the Games Workshop line. Forge World and all that, I mean, they just really like to go ahead and make that your centerpiece, if you wish, for your armies.
Yeah, they've been really putting out some beautiful models lately. I think the last vehicles they put out that were just absolutely mind-blowing were the Sisters of Battle. They put out some new tanks, and they're just insanely gorgeous. How these people are doing it, I don't know. So, vehicles have a different profile than other characters, other troops. So, you have two types of vehicles. You have land vehicles and air vehicles. So for land vehicle, you have a maximum speed, and that's measured in inches as to how fast the vehicle can go. Your land vehicle accelerate dash decelerate. So I've never worked with that before. I'm assuming like what, it goes 4 inches per turn until it gets to its maximum speed.
Yes, in essence, it was an attempt to go ahead and recognize that vehicles, although powerful, had limitations. Like, for example, they could not just go ahead and go from 0 to 20 inches in one turn. A slow tracked vehicle might have an acceleration rate of, like you just mentioned, 4 or 5, which would require it to move that many inches per turn and only increase their speed by that many inches per turn. Conversely, same for deceleration. So if you're heading straight towards a wall, you better calculate quickly to know how fast you're going to go ahead and be able to stop that vehicle before it hits that wall.
And we also have the max airspeed and the air minimum speed. This is interesting because if they're flying, they can't be stopped, because if they're stopped, they're falling to the ground. So if it's flights, you have a minimum speed that you're moving. It's interesting, which I thought was really cool because, you know, as the rules evolved over the years, it was kind of interesting when they introduced flight. I never realized that it was part of the original game.
Mm-hmm. Well, what bothers me about some of the newer versions of the game, and I'm really referencing here to Warhammer Fantasy Battle Age of Sigmar, and the idea is that you're not really flying, you almost seem to be hopping. They've kind of gotten rid of the idea that a vehicle or an air, for example, for Warhammer Fantasy Battle, they got rid of the idea that something can remain airborne during a battle. And I think that was a conceit to the need that you have to simplify some things, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that was 7th edition where they said if a unit flying if a unit flies, it begins and ends on the ground.
Right.
In 8th and 9th edition of Warhammer 40K, there's a minimum move value, but we'll explain. Well, in the next section, we have the turn radius. They took out the turn radius. They said it can either, it can rotate 90 degrees before it moves, and it can rotate up to 90 degrees after it moves. But anyway, back to Rogue Trader. Now you have to calculate if you do want to turn. Because the one thing I did notice when it said, for moving, I can't rotate it 90 degrees like I could a character or, just like an infantry model where it said you get a free 90 degrees. More than that, it costs you in inches. So the turn radius ratio, the TRR, a non-hovering vehicle turns by wheeling rather than by making precise angular turns. The radius of the wheel always equals the forward speed of the vehicle in inches multiplied by the turn radius ratio. The distance traveled by the vehicle is measured along the inside of the curve, and they got this really cool picture of a Land Raider or tank making about a 80-degree or so turn.
This was one of the more subtle and yet more interesting aspects of vehicular movement because it really set in your mind what makes a vehicle different as far as its maneuvering capabilities. You got acceleration, you got deceleration, and then you got this idea that if I'm going to be moving at high speed, my turns are going to be necessarily wider. And especially with my less maneuverable, more cumbersome vehicles, this might end up being very wide. And it varied. It was kind of neat because a track vehicle would have a low speed, but would have also a very low turning radius. So a wheeled vehicle, though, would have a higher speed, but kind of converse, or should say, also have a higher turn radius. So it would be making these wide sweeps on the battlefield when you try to go ahead and move at maximum speed.
From a tactical standpoint, I really like this because you really got to plan it out, and it makes vehicles vehicles. I mean, it gives you all the advantages and disadvantages of them.
Right,
I hate the fact of, as you say, it's crunchy.
right.
Yeah, like you say, you have to know you as the player have to plan how fast is it going. So the radius of the turn is equal to the speed times the turn radius ratio. Um, do you have an example of that? Because I failed to
Yes,
look.
absolutely. If
Okay.
if you if you go ahead and look at the vehicles, some of them could have turn radius ratios of like half, indicating a vehicle that is capable of maneuvering on a dime, almost literally. And then we also have examples of vehicles with larger turn radiuses. So it really depended on the vehicle.
Okay, so if I had a turn radius of half and I'm moving 10 inches, my radius is then 5 inches. Oh, I get it. So then I measure 5 inches from the vehicle
Right.
to wherever that pivot point is, and then I move and I measure on the inside of the track the inches that I'm moving, either the 5 or the, or, a 6 inches or so,
For
10
example,
inches or
a
5 inches.
typical bike, like your bikes that you would find Judge Dredd riding.
Okay, so like
Um,
a Space Marine bike or
sure.
even an Eldar bike.
They have turn radiuses of half.
Okay.
So if I'm going at a speed of 10, my turn radius is only 5 inches. Kind of, if you compare that now to a crawler, your typical track vehicle with a turn radius of 2, if I'm going 10 inches, I'm got a 20-inch turn radius, which means you better have a pretty big table to go and maneuver those suckers if you're going to be at any sort of decent speed. But again, think about the realistic aspect of that. If you're in a tactical combat situation, think about any battle you know of in which infantry are being supported by armored vehicle and in close quarters. That vehicle is not moving very fast. It's moving maybe 10 or 15 feet every couple of minutes in support of that infantry. So you didn't want to move fast anyway. You just stick with the infantry, provide that fire support, and then you move with them.
So did they also include fire arcs in vehicles?
Yes.
Okay. Because I didn't, under vehicles, I didn't quite see anything for firing arcs. But I know they talked about them for the infantry units.
Yeah.
So
Well,
is there a forward firing arc and a side firing arc?
yeah. It depends on the weapon that you have.
Okay.
And I think we should kind of hold off on that fact until we get to that particular section.
All
Otherwise,
right.
we're going to confuse ourselves.
Yeah. The capacity is the maximum number of human-sized models that can be carried by the vehicle, including driver and other crew. The toughness is how tough it is for calculating damage. Damage, that's how many hits it can take before it blows up. The save, it's got an armor save, just like anything else. Equipment, this column indicates the capacity of the vehicle to carry equipment. It is given as a number, which is the maximum number of points of equipment which can be carried. Now, I thought this was kind of neat because are you able to pick different equipment to put in your vehicle?
Yes, and that's one of the reasons why I really, really like this game. Again, I keep gushing over this game constantly. The idea that I can customize vehicles from scratch, and I can go ahead and put I can put medical facilities on them. I can go ahead and put weapons on them. I can put sensors on them. There are so many really interesting options that you can do with the equipment slots.
It's kind of cool. Uh, Weapons. This indicates the capacity of the weapons to mount weapons. Is given as a number. This is the number of basic type weapons that can be installed. One heavy weapon can be installed for every 2 points, and a single very heavy weapon can be installed for 6 points. For example, a vehicle with 3 weapon points might have a las gun, basic weapon, a las cannon, heavy weapon. The actual combination of weapons can and does vary tremendously. So this goes back to customizing your vehicles to the way you want them.
Yes, or if you go to page 101, they got this rather interesting table to go ahead and roll on to determine your loadout by weapon points.
So it's a randomized table where you roll a die and
Yeah, as
does
a
it
matter
for
of
you.
fact, that was kind of an interesting feature of Rogue Trader is that when you built your armies, if you followed the letter of the rules, you rolled for most of your stuff, regardless if you're equipping your 10 Space Marines or if you're building a vehicle from scratch. There was a lot of randomness in it, which from a narrative standpoint made sense because you're talking about a rather big galaxy. Who knows what you're going to have? Who knows what you're going to be able to count on? I mean, there's no supply chains leading directly from the forges of Mars all the way to some heaven forsaken, emperor forsaken planet on the very fringes of the galaxy.
So moving. Vehicles may only move during the movement phase and never move during the reserve phase. So no moving 20 inches across the table. You're moving just during the movement phase and not during the reserve phase.
Yes, and that made it for interesting situations where infantry were, sneaking up on a vehicle to do it some hurt.
So boarding and leaving vehicles. This has always been a point of great controversy in current games.
Yes.
Models may be embarked or removed from a vehicle at any point during its move. This does not reduce the vehicle's move, but it does reduce the troops' move by half. If the vehicle is moving faster than 10 inches during a turn, then it is dangerous to leave or enter. Models attempting to do so suffer an automatic hit, no saving throw, with a strength equivalent to the speed of the vehicle minus 10. I mean, how fast were vehicles going, roughly?
Well, depending on the vehicle, you could be moving fairly rapidly. I mean, you could have some vehicles, again, I'll give you some examples. Here is a land speeder, for example,
Okay.
maximum speed 24 inches on the battlefield. Okay. And that wasn't even the fastest one. If you do the random generation of speeds for an air speeder, or I should say for a land speeder, you could be moving as much as 28 inches.
Wow.
So yeah, so if you try to go ahead and say, hey, my troops are going to jump off this land speeder moving 28, well, congratulations, you just took a straight 18 hit. Go for it.
Ouch. Hope they have invulnerable saves. Oh, that's the other thing that they really didn't mention yet, or invulnerable saves, or as I like to refer to them, minimum save values.
There is no such thing as far as I can recall and as far as I can think of.
That just
There's
dawned on
no
me.
such thing as invulnerable saves.
Okay, so the number of vehicles. Okay, so you can embark or disembark at any point during the movement phase. Is it before the vehicle moves or after the vehicle moves, or can I move the vehicle, load up, and then move again?
Yes,
Okay, either, all,
which
and
is
any.
which in my opinion was a glaring deficiency in the rules. I could understand if you're suggesting I'm jumping out of a moving vehicle,
Mm-hmm.
that's a given. But I think they should have clarified, how do you board a moving vehicle? I mean, I know we can, imagine in our minds people jumping onto a vehicle moving past it, but, better have a couple of really good handholds, or as I'm going to not end
Yeah,
up on the vehicle, I'm going to end up underneath the vehicle.
or your arm's going to go with it, and your body's going to stay behind.
Exactly. So, the boarding and leaving vehicles rules was another one of those things where we kind of fudged with a little bit and we come up with some house rules indicating the idea that to board a vehicle, you had to be moving at that time at a speed equal to or less than the base move of the figures, because after all, they got to figure out a way to catch up to it. And then we still kept the rules for leaving the vehicle because I guess if you want to just jump off something, you can jump off something. You just have to take the consequences of, breaking your neck if it's moving too fast.
Makes sense. So to embark or disembark depends upon your movement value. If
Well,
you're, hmm?
that was the house rule. I mean, I don't think it says anything in there about that particular idea.
Oh, well, the number of models which can leave or enter a vehicle during the turn depends upon doors and hatches, which are treated in the same way as doors on buildings. The chart below summarizes this. So the movement value, if the troop can move 3.5 or more, 4 units can either leave or enter that turn.
Right, and that's independent of the movement of the vehicle. So if I have a
Correct.
vehicle moving 20 inches in that turn, I can still try to put 4 guys in it as the vehicle passes by, and that just something didn't make sense about that as we played a couple of games back in the day.
Yeah. And if the move value is 2.5 inches, only 3. The movement value is 1.5 or more, 2. If you're moving less than 1.5 inches, 1. So drivers, it takes drivers into account. Vehicles must be driven, and a driver requires to use at least one hand to control the vehicle. This leaves one hand free for a pistol shot or throw grenade. The character who is driving and shooting in this way counts as using both hands and suffers a -1 to hit penalty.
Usually only came up with bikes.
I could see that. I don't know, for some reason I just kept picturing like an orc wagon, and it had like 20
Yeah.
orcs on the back, and you got this goblin driving, with this Mad Max pistol, you know, hanging out the window.
And wait till you talk about firing from vehicles. That becomes an interesting situation. The goblin's firing his little pistol, and all the
Yeah.
orcs are shooting in all different directions.
Built-in weapons, forward firing built-in weapons can be fired by the driver. Both of his hands will then be occupied throughout this turn. One to drive and one to fire weapons. Otherwise, there is no penalty. Any built-in weapon can instead be fired by an additional crew member. So the forward-facing weapon, and I'm presuming every vehicle had one. Well, I shouldn't
No,
presume that.
no. But if you had one, yes, this would be the rules that are applying.
And then if there's like a side weapon, I guess a crew member would be firing them, and it would free up the driver.
Yes, or because this is the future, you could go ahead and have assume that there's a control at the driver station that you can just push a button and fires the weapon.
Well, that's later on when we talk about auto systems.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, okay. Hits on vehicles. I kind of really like this. as, a,
Cool. Yeah.
as I read this, I really liked it because this is one thing they struggled with for many, many editions. And it really, as I read through this, I'm like, this is actually kind of cool. So essentially, um, a vehicle takes damage that turn. Vehicles can be shot at in the same way as other targets. Note to hit modifiers for size and speed. Exposed crew members and open-top vehicles can be targeted and shot at within short range if the firer prefers. At long range, shots will randomly hit either the vehicle or exposed crew members. Shots at enclosed vehicles always hit the vehicle itself, never the crew inside. So as the creature's vehicles which are hit suffer damage, depending upon their toughness, and in the saving throws, the vehicles have lots of damage points. They can usually take several hits before their damage is used up. Vehicles with no damage left is destroyed, and all weapons and equipment will cease to function. Crew members are automatically killed unless they can make their basic saving throws on a D6. That's neat. So you can blow up a vehicle and the drivers and everybody inside will still run out.
Yes.
Unless they have an ejector seat, see equipment. Okay, this is the part I thought was kind of. If a vehicle sustains damage during that turn, there's a chance that some special damage effects might occur. Roll a d6 on a score of 6 indicates a problem of some kind has occurred. To find out what has occurred or what has happened, roll a d10 and consult the special damage effects chart. If the vehicle receiving more than one damage point during the turn just makes one d6 roll. Okay, so you add up all the damage at the end of the turn, then you roll the d6. So if it takes more than 1 point of damage, you take those additional points, you roll the d6, and you add it to the d6. So if it takes 4 points of damage that turn, you roll your d6, you add 3. If it is 6 or greater, it then takes a special damage effect.
Yes.
Special damage effects is actually 1 through 12. But for the damage effects, you also roll a d10, and you add that same modifier to your damage roll, to the special damage effects roll. I thought this was kind of neat. Auxiliary power, if the vehicle has turrets of any kind, one is jammed. Solid and cannot be used if the vehicle has no turrets, see 3 or 4. Temporary loss of control, you can have power loss, mechanical jams, weapon loss, system failure. You can have control loss, smell of burning. The vehicle experiences a system failure. Player rolls a d6 at the beginning of his subsequent turns. If a 6 is scored on the vehicle, it will explode. If you get a 12 or higher, it just simply reads bang. The vehicle explodes.
Now, if you look at the rules, what makes this interesting is if I can go ahead and inflict 12 points of damage that are not saved on a vehicle, it will explode no matter what its size or no matter how many damage points it can take.
What's the average wounds of a vehicle? I mean, or wounds? Yeah, what's an average
wounds? Yeah, exactly.
A Land Raider has what?
So that made for very interesting situations. If I could just lay enough firepower on that one vehicle, there was a chance that I could just go ahead and waste it, no matter how powerful that vehicle was.
Oh yes, but like, how many wounds did a Land Raider have?
Let's take a look, shall we? I'm going to go ahead and page towards there. I've got the Land Raider, the original Land Raider, which this is kind of weird. They actually do have pictures of a Land Raider model in its very earliest inceptions. And by the way, it looks beautiful. But I don't know. So they have these probably as conceptual pieces, perhaps, and they just took photos of them for it, or were they just actually using kits from other manufacturers? I'm not sure. But anyway, to get to your question, a Land Raider has 5 wounds.
Okay, 5 wounds. Okay. Yeah. 5, that's it? I thought it would have had more than that.
It's interesting. It's very easy to go ahead and oh, hang on a second. Let me just double check something real quick. Hold on. No. I'm sorry. I read the wrong section. I'm sorry. It has 20.
Oh, 20. Okay.
30.
30.
You're gonna have to edit out that mistake. I don't want to look like I can't read a book.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, it has 30 damage points.
Wow.
Sorry.
Oof.
But remember, I can go ahead and do 12 damage to it. If I do 12 in one turn, boom.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even if you do 5 or 6, let's say you do 6 wounds to it that turn.
Yep.
30 minus 6, you got 24 left. You're rolling a d10. You're adding 6 to it, or 5 to it, actually.
You're adding 5, and
so, I mean,
you're better. Boom.
You roll a 7 or better. Yeah, it's bang.
Yep.
It's GON, gone. All right, moving out of control. Oh man, I feel like that every morning. For each vehicle moving out of control at the beginning of the turn, to determine speed and direction changes during movement. The player has no control whatsoever over the path or speed. Roll to determine speed using 2d10s. Now, I think it's funny, they actually spelled out TWO d10s, where in more modern times they would actually put the number 2d10. One standing for acceleration and the other for deceleration. So you roll 2 and you add them together. And that changes the speed in which they're moving. What about the direction?
That's down there. Quick D6 roll
Oh,
tells
there
you
it
which
is.
direction you're going to move in.
Okay, yeah. So then to determine which direction, roll a d6. On a 1 to 2, you go left. 3 or 4, you go right. 5 to 6, you're going straight ahead. And I guess if you're turning right, you would need to use that turn radius formula again. So when would a vehicle go out of control? Is that only on the special effects or the special damage effects?
Yes, or if you're traveling faster than your maximum speed.
Now, is that done
So if
on
you're
purpose?
pushing, yeah, if you're pushing the red line there, you
Oh,
have a chance of going out of control every turn.
imagine that, traveling over maximum speed. A vehicle attempting to travel over its maximum speed will go out of control for the duration of the following turn on a d6 score of a 6. So if turning is increased to a 5 or 6, if out of control in the previous turn increases to 4, 5, or 6. Okay, so the driver's trying to get the vehicle back under control.
Right.
So I can actually go faster than my maximum speed.
Yeah, so what they probably should have called that is not really a maximum speed. You probably should just call it a safe speed.
Okay. Is there a limit as to how fast a vehicle can go? I mean, is that
You know, there is a point that should have been made back in the 1980s.
oh, okay.
There should have been something in there saying about how fast can you go maximum. And, you know, I'm going to just look at the vehicle profiles again just to make sure that I'm going to speak intelligently. But there was nothing in there that said that you could not just keep accelerating until either you were off the board or Newtonian physics took over at some
Yeah.
point. Um, but yeah, the game was not perfect. There were issues that had to be addressed. And that's why, again, they keep emphasizing, hey, the referee has to do this, the referee has to do that,
Yeah.
because there are some issues.
There's a lot of judgment calls. I mean, I could see it where like if you go over so many parts of your movement, like let's say you had an acceleration of 6 and
Mhm.
you have a maximum speed of, I don't know, 24. If you're going 24 to 30, then you're at a 5 or 6 to go out of control. If you're moving 30 to 36, you have a 4, 5, or 6 of going out of control. The faster you go, the more probability that you'll have of losing control of the vehicle.
And I think, and this is just me talking without any sort of actual evidence to back this up, I just think that they were trying to go in and simulate the idea of reckless driving without having just chart after chart after chart.
Yeah, I could see that. Collision. Did you want to go over collision?
Make a long story very short, again, that's another reason why I like this game. If any time I can play a game and my tank can run into a wall and we can see what happens to both, that makes me pretty happy. Essentially, what you have to realize is that your speed kills. So you're going to suffer damage equal to a die roll of a d4 for every 5 inch of your combined speed of both vehicles. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah. So if two vehicles, run into each other, there's going to be quite a bit of damage depending on how fast they're going. Okay. But, you get to add your opposing vehicle's toughness and then subtract your own toughness. So here's where things got interesting. If I was driving in a semi tractor trailer, for example, and ran over a stationary bike, like not a stationary bike, but a bike that was stationary.
He's
I don't
pedaling as
have,
fast as he can, but he's not going anywhere.
yeah, I don't want Peloton to get mad at me with tanks running over the stationary bikes there. But make a long story short, yeah, you could do that and probably not take any damage to your own vehicle, but crush the living daylights out of the bike. Same thing for your immobile terrain, your static terrain. But of course, you don't have to worry about its speed. You just have to worry about your speed versus the features. So it wasn't perfect, but it was really, really great to simulate things bashing into each other. I mean, they even have rules for if you run into a space marine, if you ran into a dinosaur when you're doing this. Same basic rules, take the speeds, subtract the toughness, add the toughness, and then figure out who actually got the damage.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, really quickly, if you do have a collision, you have to go ahead and check for being out of control, if I remember correctly.
Auto systems. So this is a bit what we touched on before. Most vehicles incorporate robotic systems which are capable of performing one or more tasks normally accomplished by driver or crew. The effect of these is simple to remove the need for an associated crewman. The following systems are available. You can auto drive. The vehicle will drive itself according to a verbal instruction. Auto drive are sophisticated, intelligent computers, and will avoid danger, take evasive action, and otherwise behave in a manner comparable to a living driver. There's auto aim. An auto aim unit can fire and control one mounted weapon, which is activated verbally and will set appropriate targets as instructed. And there's auto fac. The unit provides automatic facilities such as opening doors, hatches, and opening other equipment. So I wonder if that would help out with like loading and unloading of passengers.
Not technically, but it was a possibility if the referee would agree. If you could go ahead and say, I have an auto door system, you could say, well, that might allow one more troop to load into that vehicle that turn. But it was not official.
All right. And yeah, that's vehicles in a nutshell.
Yes, and again, the game is so wonderfully layered with all the different possibilities, with all the different combinations and permutations of scenarios and circumstances and situations. And we are on page 40 of the rule book, and the rule book continues to page 60. We haven't even touched on things like aerial vehicles, dreadnoughts, robots, mutations, psychic powers. I mean, it's just, I need to go ahead and always have some sort of napkin available because I just want to drool every time I think about the possibilities in this type of a game. And if I could ever convince the people I play Warhammer 40K with now, I would love us to go back to the old school.
All right, and that wraps up vehicles. And next week, as Rob said, we got dreadnoughts and robots and psychics and really cool stuff. And guys, if you have any questions, comments, we would love to hear from you. Please email us at rulesexplained@gmail.com.
Please, email.
I'm John Merritt.
I'm Rob Nothing.
Guys, thank you for listening.
Adios.